Hey folks, so we're on day 5 of basic design. Today is mostly a large critique, um, and then followed by a lecture and uh, some demos regarding how to scan images. So I'll cover what do we do in the critique. So students set up, they've now created sets. So they were initially with their thumbnails in their black and white squares project, they were getting at different ideas, and now we're trying to coordinate those holes. So you can see how do we select good thumbnails from the 6 different ideas that they're trying to allude to, illustrate, express, however you want to think about them. They're all choosing different strategies for those things. Coordinate them into a group of things. You can see how this project very quickly begins to resemble the process of branding and branding design, though it is not that. If any creditors checking me, I'm not doing branding projects, but you can see how it relates to those things because all of those things build out of the fundamental aspects of what a design course should teach you. So they're getting diverse things to coordinate together. And so they've made 2 sets. I've encouraged them to use 2 different strategies, one of unity and variety, as we mentioned before. And so usually they have 2 sets. One is more united, one is more varietous. And then they discuss and talk about, well, what strategies do you think the students were taking? And so the students who's getting critiqued, I ask them to remain relatively silent. Like they can say, here's one set, and there's another set. And then they sit back and listen to their peers talk about their work. And the questions they're trying to answer, again, these are baby steps in critique. They're trying to answer which one's more united. Is this a united set or is this a varietal set? And they didn't have to do that. So you don't know necessarily that one is going to be one or the other. Maybe a student is like, I don't want to do any united sets. I want to go crazy. That happens. So they're discussing those aspects, and that leads them into talking about elements and principles of design and seeing where are the things being united. I'm trying to get them to like live into this vocabulary of, line, shape, color, texture, depth, balance, symmetry, asymmetry, all of these things they're trying to get through into their vocabulary through usage. And then they choose which set they think is most effective and interesting, the best set for each person, not in the class, but for each person. And I break them up into groups because I've got larger classes these days. And so they're working in groups and they're going through and discussing these things. And inevitably, we get to talk more about the context because almost across the board, you will see that the sets that have larger presences of black ink will be chosen in favor of other ones. And depending on the class you have, some classes have a lot of exciting varietal people. In fact, my 2 classes, basically one is more leaning towards variety, one's leaning more towards unity. But because of the context of the wall, and the wall is white, that black bounces off of it. If we had an all black wall, then lots of white pieces would look great. But for a variety of reasons, the standards of teaching culture today would be a white wall. And so we're working with a white wall as a neutral space to try to create work on top of it. And then on top of that, we have a certain distance. The students sit generally about 6 to 8 feet away from the wall. I stand right up next to it, but very few of them do. So we talk about how the context of the space is changing which sorts of set work. That doesn't mean that one set that isn't chosen doesn't have a context in which it would be better. We talk about all of that for, ad nauseum. And they're trying to get at this sense of the next step is they need to whittle it down to one. So how do they choose what an effective set will be? And this is where the conversation changes. Like we talk about this in our context. We talk about what is the class like? What is Professor Greg like? He's always wanting variety. He's looked at thousands and thousands of these squares before. He's getting really tired of seeing the same ideas over and over. And so in order to impress him with the squares, you probably need to go towards the side of variety. I actually was really impressed today by one of them in particular. Did something at this stage that I've never had a student do before at this stage. I've seen it all. So from there, I like to present both sides of this. So if I'm someone who's generally going to be more attracted towards things that have a high degree of variety, as in they look different than I'm expecting, I'm going to be attracted to that. But that's not how every audience works. Many audiences are seeking unified things that align with their expectations in order to be comforted, etc. We all do this. Like when you walk into a store, if they do not have a good checkout or good branding, it gets frustrating. I think the perfect example was for me was a place in Boston called I think it was called Johnny Cupcakes. Like people are walking around in this downtown area. I don't know if it's still there. Who knows? It could have gotten crushed by COVID or whatever. But you're walking around downtown. You're with restaurants, all of these things on Tremont Street, I think, and you see a place that says Johnny Cupcakes, and you think, hey, we could get a little treat, get a cupcake or whatever. You walk in, and it looks like a cupcake shop. And then you walk up to the displays where there should be cupcakes, and there's T-shirts. And then you're like, wait, do you guys sell cupcakes? And then, of course, the young people who look at you with disdain and they're angry and are like, no, this is a T-shirt company. It's like, oh, well, you unified yourself through all of your design and branding to something that looks like a cupcake store. And now you're mad when people come in expecting it to be a cupcake store. You're like, well, didn't you notice there's a T-shirt on the logo? It's like, T-shirts are not an iconic symbol that makes you think that person's selling a T-shirt, because it's a T-shirt logo with their logo on the T-shirt. Like, it's weird. It was not a great design, and so it doesn't work in every case. Unity doesn't work in every case, and neither does variety. Variety can lead to a bunch of frustrations. But that's one example. The examples we walk through in detail, I will share my screen here, are the, how do I can't see this. There we go. I think this is sharing. Are the 1968 Mexico Olympics and the London 2012 Olympics. Now, before we get into this, we talk about what are the design problems an Olympic branding campaign might face, and where are they going to get inspiration from. And so, things like you have the text 1968 Mexico Olympics. You also have the Olympic logo, the 5 rings. And then you also have the culture that the thing is in. So you might be able to draw things from that, which almost all of the branding designs do to some degree. And then you have to think about the actual design problems of, like, what is the Olympics? A bunch of people coming to a single town to explore all of these different events and watch and spectate and compete. There's going to be lots of navigation issues. The main design problems are going to be, how do you get people to move through the city? And So there's a great story about Lance Wyman and how he won a contest with this logo design here, where he, look, Olympic rings, the word, the number 68 actually did a lot of work in inspiring him. Look at how the rings fold into the logo very nicely. And all this was done in 1968, well, probably 66 and 67. But it was all done by hand without computers. You can see the kinds of things that are emerging out of this. And you might think, well, he's definitely getting inspiration beyond just the text and the word Olympic and the logo. And indeed he was. He was getting inspiration from different aspects of Mexican cultural identity, including these ancient forms of art that are found there. And he was also looking at op art. 1960s op art was like when technology was allowing artists to do interesting, cool, patterned things in better ways. We can do it faster now with computers, but they had different printing processes, so duplicating this did not require the sorts of limitations that painting signage by hand would. And it allows for these fun, strange optical effects where, especially the longer you stare at it, I'm getting mesmerized by it. It starts to move and do strange things. And so he's drawing inspiration from a variety of places. This is him. This is Smithographic, by the way. I'm just creative.com. And we can see the early version here. We can see some of his inspiration down there. And we can see the problem, the big city, all these different event spaces, but the use of the typeface. The typeface brings in unity and immediately makes you know that this is an Olympic event. You can see some of these icons, which are a little small here. We'll get a closer look at those icons. And then, of course, the use of color. And so much of this in the sense of metropolitan area navigation was so good that cities adopted it later, that this kind of thing was not happening much around the world. And so this worked so well for this event that metropolitan areas adopted these techniques of a high degree of unity, and with this sense of variety of line color, some actual imagery of the places, both cultural and sporting. They developed a series of icons, which I thought this was funny. I asked my students if they knew what this was, and they did. They knew what a rotary phone was. And then I asked if they knew the difference between these two, and they didn't. They didn't know that there was a time where some phones could call international and some couldn't. But so they developed these systems. Some of them still make sense to us today. Some of them don't. Some of them are a little more detailed than we'd like. Like I think the trash one is very funny. The notion that people from all over the world would necessarily understand what this means is unique. But you can see some of the other ones that are coming in, and these ones are really interesting. Like the city square. I don't know what that is. Like, what is that supposed to mean? Calisthenics? I think that this is like modern art, library, classical art, ballet, healing circle. Some of them definitely don't work. Ancient Mayan kind of thing, sports related. And then we get into when they start using the colors. And I love how simple and straightforward they are, like sailing, swimming, kayaking, rowing. This one's always fun. Everyone always goes volleyball, but then you see, oh, wait a minute, water polo. I don't know what these two are, the difference between them, but wrestling, gymnastics, field hockey, boxing. They're so quick, so easy to identify. And then they can attach them to different colors, and so those colored lines can be painted throughout the town, throughout the city. All of them playing around with what their initial design is following these cool, unique colored lines all throughout, and it worked really well to help people navigate. It allowed for a lot of variety within a unified system. So there was potential for variety throughout. And you can see, it was just super impactful. It worked well. I think that tons of designers still love this today. I know lots of design teachers who use this in their classes as an example. I love these, look at that comma. I just love that comma. So we talk about this as a successful one. And then we pair that, if you're seeing my screen here, we pair that with an unsuccessful one. At least this was panned universally by many people. And that would be the London 2012. This is the first class I had where students immediately saw the 2012. In case you don't, this is a 2, this is a 0, this is a 1, and then this is like a 2 with its head chopped off and it's like dangling there. So you can see immediately how they took something that should be unified, specifically numbers and letters. We really need those to maintain their shape to be understandable. Otherwise, we don't see them as letters. And so many people did not see this as numbers. It took me 8 years. I didn't realize it was numbers until 2020. But so these are numbers, that's not what a 1 looks like, and this is not a 2. And when you chop off the front of it and dangle it there, it's really not a 2. But they took that, made it really weird. They did some other things, they're doing some of the things that Mexico was doing with showing the variety of the logo, but then they did this to it. And it's so distracting with all these different things that many people do not pick up on the fact that this is a logo for a certain thing. I believe it's the Paralympics, but it's a part of the thing that's separate, but unified within the whole set of of London Olympics 2012. And they just, they brought too much stuff in. They cluttered it up and made something that has high stakes, international audience, worldwide, problems that are difficult, navigating around a major city, all of that stuff. And they made it, they distracted it, and they did even more, that and this. I just love how hard it is to see the British flag in it, and how hard did they have to work to make sure they got the little bits of blue in there. Very funny. I thought this was funny. The students pointed out how even the O doesn't really fit into the rest of the aesthetics of the form. And I was like, well, yeah, how do you solve, if this is your D, your O is going to have to look exactly like your D. And you use the O a lot for Olympics. So they kept the ring for the O in the Olympics, but then the rest of the typeface doesn't really work with it that well. It's very strange. Then, of course, they had another problem, and that is all of these events. They tried to use iconography, but also it was harder than 1968. They've got more, like, look, they've got 4 types of bicycling. You need to distinguish those so that people who don't speak the language can figure it out. But you can see, like, they had to include this the text underneath, which means your iconography probably failed to some degree. I love beach volleyball. Like, if you didn't know it was beach volleyball, like, what I thought, like 2 people falling to their death when their parachutes didn't open up, and like that's another head. Even the boxing one, like, imagine trying to distinguish this detail from a distance compared to the boxing glove, like, and sailing, like, what? That's not the, like, I know that is what a sailboat looks like, but when I think of the icon of a sailboat, like, triangles, it has a triangle sail. I know they don't actually. That's not the point of iconography. So there's lots of ways in which, like, even shooting, they cut the gun off to where I don't even notice it's a gun. Like, there's so many things that are bizarre. And then I love, the pentathlon. Look at how small that swimmer is. Like, they just did a lot of different things that don't make sense. And this one in particular, if you didn't have the word triathlon, what on earth is this? Like, a guy running after a bike? And, like, look at the little hint of water right there. Like, it's insanely detailed. Well, you might say, well, Greg, that all depends on the context. Where are these little detailed icons going to be? Let's see some of the places. We'll talk about this first. We'll get to the icon question in a moment. But, similar to 68, they tried to have this, like, show the geometry. And so 68 did the op art thing where it resonates out. They're trying to see the underlying geometry to create a pattern. Which is not a pattern. It's utter chaos. Now, there is a sense where, does this relate? The Mexico 68 was using Mayan imagery to connect to the culture. There is a building in London called the Shard, I believe, and they could use that, and I think they did, as their main kind of image that connected them to the culture. So I do think they were trying to do some of these things, but they weren't perfectly. On top of that, I just want to point out, like, this line right here, coming through, doesn't line up with the geometry. Sorry, being persnickety off of this chaotic thing. But so then they took that mass that was chaos and tried to use it as an organizing principle on something like a stadium. And I like to point out, like, when we think of the abstract of the stadium map, you got your ticket, tells you, like, section, row, seat number. There are lots of ways to distinguish those things, and there are lots of helpful ways to distinguish them on maps. And it is not this. Generally, you make sections be all one color. Now, you could still do this in the design, so maybe the tickets did have color-coded sections that made more sense, but when you have your seats with this kind of pattern on them, they start to be, discombobulating. They don't adhere to the kinds of organization systems that help our minds. Like, it would have been better if all the seats were one color. Instead, you're getting thrown off. There's never a moment where you're like, oh, that's north, or that's, you have to look many places to orient yourself in these chaotic arrangements in all of these stadiums. We can keep scrolling down. You can see, like, it's chaotic. And we have these crazy things, which they're funny. They're like weird space monsters. Is their gates? But I like to point out this right here. So here we can see some application of where the icons are going to be used on these nice signs. Like, if I could walk up and look at it this close, like, that'll be great. Except look at the scale. This is the human being. That's not right in their face. That's like 5 of them above their head. And you can see, like, here, even here in these, like I can see these pretty well, and, like, they're drawing a copper box. I know it's at an angle, but this is with a zoomed lens. That's diving. I can't see them. Like, so there's something, Riverbank Arena, there's some sort of field and a guy with a pole, maybe field hockey. Okay, I can tell that's cycling. Hey, that one's called BMX track. That's the most obvious one of these. Basketball arena. But they had to actually, like, put pictures of the actual buildings, which is hilarious. And here, like, again, like, this is the same area. Like, those icons are not readable. What is that one? Very weird. And you can see the scale here. Like that's a guy. He's got like these ones he can read, and the rest like that's insane. You can't see that very well. It's so hard. So there's lots of reasons to criticize this, and I mean, it's kind of like kicking a dead horse. But there's just so many aspects where it didn't work very well, and it was very like it just had way too much variety. So I like to use this to point out to the students that like when we talk about things having potential, you have to take into account the context, and you also have to think about like what how is this going to be seen, how is it going to be used, all of those sorts of things. And the 2012 and the 1968 Olympics are trying to approach similar problems with different strategies. In this context, I think it's very clear, at least historically, like people are still buying memorabilia from the 1968 Olympics because it was so iconic and interesting, and it worked. The systems it set up were adopted across the world. I don't think there's anyone who's looking for 2012 memorabilia unless for some reason it has personal significance to their lives. I mean, I think that was the year Michael Phelps did the craziness. I don't remember. It didn't have the same staying power. It didn't have the unity that allowed for variety. It didn't have a unity in its core that allowed variety on the exterior. Instead, variety was its core, and it didn't hold together with some sort of unity. From there, let me switch back to here and get back to scene one. So from there, the students are considering that. They're going to be trying to make interesting sets that have potential, kind of finalize that we're going to move into composition making from here. We're going to take a break from them for a moment, which is nice. And the other thing they learn is how to scan. We talk about DPI, and we're going to move forward with one of these drawings of their animals. One of the things I like to point out with these, and to further explain why I use the animal, is that most innovation in the realm of creativity comes through novel connections being made. What that means is you need to start with things. So when I talk about that parable of Stan, the guy making his railroad, and how he's arranging these things and he's noticing novel connections, that is between, I think he said, Little Jack and Linda or something like that. In that, you need to start with some material, something like to push against you. And so the bug is that we get to move forward with that in the next project, where we're going to take a break from the black and white squares, take a break from, this section of the black and white squares focuses on refinement, and they're going to further refine. So we're doing a lot of going through the whole process, pointing out what happens in each step of the creative process. Why are we doing these things? So you can get the practice, because again, it's a process. I can tell you all about it. You can listen to me yammer on about this, but it is nothing compared to actually doing it, actually making things, actually critiquing them, actually exploring, actually analyzing your feedback and thinking about it. So today was a day of thinking about refinement. What does it mean to refine? How do you know when you've refined successfully? What are we testing? Why do we critique? And how do we critique? And how can we think of that like a focus group test of some sort? And then how do we move forward from there? How do we keep cycling through this? So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in a few days.